Avoidance shows up in overworking. Ding, 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 right? Avoidance shows up in overcaring for other people. Hello, friends and therapists, right? It shows up in shopping. It shows up in substance abuse and alcohol use in so many ways, in gaming or technology addiction. Like there's so many ways we can avoid. And so rather than avoid, can we find enough support to gently approach?
Hey, it's Amy from Create Magic at Work. We all have parts of ourselves and experiences that once felt unwelcome, unsafe to express, or deeply misunderstood. So we buried them. We're about to go treasure hunting in the places you were taught to avoid. This episode is part of a special mini-series called Finding Treasures in the Trash, hosted by executive coach and creator of Inner Truth Work, Cari Crevetto. Cari brings decades of corporate leadership and deep spiritual practice to guide high-achieving, soul-seeking humans through the process of reclaiming the parts of themselves they've cast aside. Through raw conversations and profound truth work, each episode invites you to turn toward what you've disowned and begin integrating it back into the whole, beautiful human that you are. Because your treasure doesn't always live in the light. Sometimes it's buried in the trash. Grab your gloves, Cari lead the way. Let's dig through this trash.
This is Cari Crevetto. Thank you so much for joining me on Finding Treasures in the Trash, a 12-episode mini-series nesting under Create Magic at Work. If you like what you hear, I'm offering you a special 5-day meditation series called 5 Days to Truth. It's the beginning practice of what we're talking about here on Finding Treasures in the Trash. You can also follow me on Instagram, or you can find me at my website, bravedirections.com. Thank you so much for listening. Welcome to Finding Treasures in the Trash. I am so excited to welcome my dear friend, Lisa Danylchuk. Lisa is a psychotherapist. She is a yoga teacher who's taught at some of the most well-regarded and landmark studios in California. She's the founder of the Center for Yoga and Trauma Recovery in Oakland, California. And she is the author of 3 books, including How You Can Heal and her most recent book, Yoga for Trauma Recovery, published by Routledge. She's a graduate of UCLA and Harvard University. She has been the past president for the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, and was involved in launching their UN task force dedicated to the same topic. Lisa, welcome to Finding Treasures in the Trash.
Thank you, Cari. I'm so happy to be here.
So we met over 20 years ago when we were assigned to be roommates at a yoga retreat. And I want to say it was kind of like one of those pivotal moments. It was love at first sight from a friendship standpoint.
It really was. I remember that retreat so clearly. It was at Zaca Lake outside of Santa Barbara. I remember the lake. I remember swimming across it. I remember the teacher, Laura, and you and I having conversations with her. And it does not feel like it was 22-ish years ago. It does not feel like that long ago, but it is a memory I treasure as well. And I'm so glad we're still connected.
Well, and it was one of that moments. Like I remember walking through the door of our little cabin.
Yes.
And you were already set up. Of course, you were early. I was late, typical. And I just looked in your eyes and you have this bright, amazing glow. To this day, it's only become brighter. And just thinking, I'm going to know this person for the rest of my life. And here we are. So that yoga retreat was a defining moment for your life. Can you share with listeners what that was about for you?
I mean, yoga was defining at my life in that point. I think the retreat was in 2003, if I'm counting correctly. And I had just lost my older brother in 2002. So I was really going through it. And I approached that loss by just diving into it head first. Like Some people compartmentalize, some people completely dissociate, everyone does different things. I don't even know that you can fully control what you do, but my response was to just dive in. And yoga was the thing that really, really helped me to connect with myself, to process that loss. And I think there was this really beautiful, you used the word landmark studios earlier. There was this really beautiful community in Santa Monica around that time, around yoga. There was so much enthusiasm around yoga and healing. And
Yeah, it was really the early days. I mean, we were so lucky to be able to study with this community. I can remember doing classes with Shiva Ray with like 5 people in them.
oh yeah, community classes at Yoga Works with people who then went on to like headline festivals and headline conferences. And yeah, and even Laura Miles, who taught that retreat, she was so phenomenal. And she didn't quite go into that like yoga spotlight in the same way, but she talked about doing yoga with her mom when she was just like so young. And she had such a profound spiritual approach and connection. And so being on that retreat with you was an investment in my own healing, right? It was, okay, I'm doing these practices while I'm in school at UCLA, while I'm in Santa Monica. I was just about to graduate at that time, but taking a whole weekend, a whole week away whenever I could to just really immerse myself, especially in nature and yoga and this community. And it was such a treat to meet you because we were both already a part of that yoga community. And then we build over time these really deep friendships within it. And there was just such a sense of safety and connection in that. Like, even though it was a really hard time in my life, as we're talking about it, when I think back about it, I just get this warm, fuzzy feeling, like the most beautiful, energetic hug, right? Because yeah, I was hurting and I was processing a lot, and that was super traumatic the way I lost my brother. And I get to hug you. I get to be your roommate, and I get to do Laura Miles yoga class at Zaka Lake and just be surrounded by so much love. And there was something that felt really steady now as I think back from where we are in the world now. It felt more like you could trust, you could lean into the community, you could lean into the teachers. The more the traumas come up in communities, the more it's like, ooh, I don't know about that method. I don't know about that teacher. And there's some really gnarly stuff that's come up, and I'm glad it has. But I do think we had good people directly around us, even if there was, impacts of trauma within the community that we weren't aware of at the time. And there was just this sense of support in that, like, I can just lean on Cari. I can just lean
Yeah,
on
we
Laura.
can drop down on each other at that time. And it was a really special time because yoga was pretty nascent. There were like 2 or 3 studios in Santa Monica, which now God knows how many there are. So you talked about this was a time, shortly after your older brother had died. And you shared that, some people compartmentalize, some people disassociate. What do you feel like drove you to go into the pain, to go into the healing at that time?
I think there's some element of I had the capacity to, in that I did have a steady, healthy family, good friends. I was working to some degree. I was teaching fitness classes and teaching yoga soon after, but I think there was enough steadiness in my life that I could just kind of let everything fall apart. And the things I let fall apart or fall away were more, I think before that, I would be the student who had like, I'm going to go to the environmental club, and then I'm going to go to the communication studies meeting, and then I'm going to take extra classes, and I'm going to do all these things. And so with the intensity of that, I just let the things that weren't really meaningful fall away. And yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know that it's a choice that we have how we respond to shock or trauma or grief. I don't think we know until we're there. But I think I also knew enough about psychology that I was like, I do it now or I do it later. And in some ways, again, everyone has their process and I want to honor that. But in some ways, it can be harder to try to go back and get it, right? Because then it's locked up for however we have to kind of work with whatever the defense is, or we have to work with whatever the strategy was in addition to working with the content, right? So this wasn't cognitive. I wasn't thinking, oh, why don't I dive in? Because I'm going to prevent myself from doing this in the future. But it was more just, this is happening now, which is a very yoga mindfulness approach. Like, what are you really feeling right now in your body and your mind and your emotions? So I just almost in a way wanted to honor my brother in that too. Like, I'm not going to go on and pretend like things that aren't that important are important to me right now. I'm going to allow this to impact me in the way that it truly has and truly does. And I'm going to see where it goes. Like, there was definitely some courage in that, or some like, I don't know, like, let's just blow up my whole life and see. And not in a self-destructive way. I didn't do anything. I mean, I was just like obsessively going to yoga, if you're going to say something, but I don't know. I just felt like, bring it. If this is the hard stuff of life, let me go through it and see what comes out the other side.
It's so beautiful what you're saying. And I feel a little emotional in my throat just naming that you going into the pain and the falling apart of it is an honoring of your brother. And I would even propose, this podcast is called Finding Treasures in the Trash. And it's about this idea that we go through hard experiences. We contain multitudes of shadow, things that we don't like about ourselves, whether it's a lack of confidence or insecurity or jealousy or sadness or grief or shame. And it's so easy to make a decision to just keep doing in life, to keep achieving, to keep moving forward. A lot of the listeners on this podcast are people who are coming at this from a business standpoint. And it's so easy for us to just get up, do our routine, and not fall apart and not honor. And it's one thing to say, I'm going to honor my brother. And it's another thing to say, I'm going to honor myself as well.
And I really just questioned everything at that point. I was almost done with UCLA, and part of me was like, do I want to finish? And really quickly, I was like, yeah, I definitely want to finish. I love UCLA. Like, I loved being there. I loved learning. I didn't have one of those career trajectories where you really had to tick boxes. So I just shifted. I was already studying psychology and interpersonal communication. So I took a class on stress and coping. It's like, I think it was an opportunity some people call trauma. I remember this, especially around the time we met, people talking about trauma as like a spiritual initiation, but I do think whatever you want to call it, there is an element of, if you let it impact you, that can lead to some pretty profound internal and external changes, but those don't have to be bad. Those can be amazing. Those can recenter you. You can get more connected to what's true for you, what's important to you, how you want to spend the time and energy that you have in life. And other things can fall away. You don't even have to sit and analyze all the other stuff. It can just fall.
Right. I wanted to dive into this concept of, you said some people don't have a choice, right? Whether it's our personal life conditions or our situation. And you talked about, the conditions were right. You had a supportive family and you had friends. And what about for people where they feel overwhelmed with anxiety or depression, or maybe they're so stressed out because they're running on a treadmill of life, they don't feel like they have the conditions to like fall apart and drop in? Like, is there a path for them to do this kind of work, to lean into the parts that scare us?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a trauma therapist now and was raised by therapists. So I'm very aware that there are no two processing situations that are going to look the same. We can connect, we can learn from each other. I do think, like, if I had been in the place where I was very lucky. I didn't have to pay tuition at UCLA. So if I were paying my own tuition and working for rent and bill, if I was really having to hold it together in this way, or raising a kid at the same time or something, right? Like I had a 2-year-old goddaughter at that point, right? Oh no, she was much older at that point. I had an 8-year-old goddaughter at that point. So when you think about people having dependents, having financial obligations, or having just a base of mental health that doesn't feel strong, like I can dive into this, then we just pace it and measure it. And what I would say to folks like that who are listening, who are like, I can't dive into this, is just, well, where do you find space for it? And what's the right amount for today? It might be the tiniest drop of connecting to how you're truly feeling and what's going on inside. But when you can keep even a thread of that connection, it can help. I also want to say that completely dissociating, even though it can become a mental health diagnosis, it's an amazing tool. Like the people I work with have been through things that most listeners probably don't even want to hear about on this podcast, like torture. People who've been tortured and dissociate, good job. You made it through that, you know?
Yeah, it's our body's way of managing ourselves through those impossibly like things we could never dream of or think of that might happen to us. And it's our body's way of saying, hey, I'm going to keep you alive. I'm going to get you through this.
And so I want to celebrate those ways that we cope. And if anyone's listening is like, oh, I have so much trauma I still have to process, like most people do, right? And especially if you've been through really gnarly stuff, if you're still coping with that, I want to first celebrate A, that you're alive and you made it through, and B, that you're coping with it. Then we start to work with, well, is this the most helpful way for me to cope with it right now? If I address it a different way, am I going to feel better in my life? So I feel like if you don't feel like you can dive in, and there's a little bit of a question of that, right? Like sometimes I'm planning a trip and I ask someone if they want to come. And they're like, oh, I can't afford it. And then I see them go to the bar and spend hundreds of dollars on drinks. And I'm like, you probably could have afforded it if you didn't do that. Or, so sometimes there's an internal like, oh, I can't do that right now, when you really, if you stop and wait and listen, maybe you can. But sometimes there's a real wisdom in that I can't go there. And so finding, like I said, I was lucky I had support. So finding support, finding where you can be in touch with it. For some people, that's crying in the shower or in the car, or just listening to a certain song, or carrying a picture in your wallet, even if looking at it is too painful. And then just knowing too, I would say to folks who feel that way, that there are therapies that can really help you process through. And I know there's an access thing with therapy. People try to go through their insurance and it can be challenging. Like if you can find a way to a clinic or a school or someone that is within your insurance, or if you can pay out of pocket and go to private practice, whatever, if you can find someone you feel connected to who also ideally has some trauma training tools that can help you address what you've been through, and that they can pace with you. You don't even want a therapist that's going to be like, let's dive in and I'm going to force you to do that. Like that, no. Like, again, this is just my experience, but other people's experience is going to be different. If you're going to dive in, you want someone to hold your hand, you find a great therapist, great. Or if you want to dive in slow, you want to put your toe in and walk in the cold water 1 inch at a time, it might be better for you. And I'm not one to say, unless I'm like directly working with someone in my life or in my practice, of like what's best.
Well, and I am certainly a dive in all the way, go to the deep end of the pool as quickly as possible. That's my personality. And in some ways, that served me very, very well. I'm also aware of the fact that, I'm on the side of feeling safe in my life and having a lot of space to do this. And so I'm very cognizant of people who have different levels of that safety and ability and time and energy. I love what you said, though, about accessing our own wisdom. Am I excusing myself from not looking at my trash and doing the dumpster dive to see what's here and to uncover my shadowy side? Or am I ready? And assessing our own readiness, and even I've found that I push myself. I really do push myself. And part of this work that I'm doing, and I'm introducing a process called inner truth work, is from a page from my own process, which was to, you and I have very different methodologies, but I think it's similar in that my process has been to get fully embodied through meditation. And once I'm inside the universe of myself, I kind of go on an exploration for like, what's here? And in that exploration, I'm pulling out some component that I just know I've tucked somewhere away. And it can be, you're talking about torture trauma. My traumas weren't torture. I mean, I want you to talk about this because this whole idea of like, what's a trauma? But whatever it is that conditions us to hide or disown or disengage from parts of ourselves or experiences in our lives because it's too hard to let it in. And in some ways, I go on this treasure hunt looking for that because I've learned just through my own volition and through a lot of people that helped me on the way and some of our ancient teachers that when I have picked up those pieces of quote unquote trash and I have brought them into the forefront of my being, as scary as it is, those are the doorways. Those are the portals. Those are the things that have, number one, brought me extreme peace and completeness in my life, but have also changed the trajectory of my path.
There's something in what you're talking about of just acknowledging what's true. And what's true for many of us is we've been through really hard things. And it's natural to have so many different responses to that, shock or traumatic responses. And when you talk about trauma, the first thing that people assess is, well, are you having intrusive thoughts? Are you having patterns of avoidance? So what you're talking about there is like approaching versus avoiding something. So we can approach it gently. We can approach it aggressively. We can approach it in all kinds of
I'm aggressive. I'm like all in.
Yeah. Right. Or you can avoid it. And so I would say for folks who don't have a lot of resources, it's like, well, maybe there's a time where containing it is helpful. We're not going there so that you can keep going to work, so that your kids keep getting food, so that you feel a sense of up and down and right in the world. Like, okay, but know that it's there. And then can you approach it gently? And again, that might just be a drip a day. Maybe you say a prayer for a moment. Maybe you plant a flower that reminds you of that person. And some days just looking at that is enough, right? And I'm speaking in terms of loss, that type of trauma here.
But what about the loss? What about the kind of, for sake of no better word, shadow work or looking at our hard stuff? What about just like, for our listeners here, like I hear a lot of imposter syndrome, for example, from my clients, and these are clients who are in the C-suite or who are VPs, right? And the insecurity that they feel around showing up in a leadership position, right? And I think there's some kind of guilt sometimes with like, okay, I'm not the person who's necessarily trying to feed my kids, but I'm still feeling angst and pain and stress and anxiety and suffering. Like, how does that work for someone like them?
How does what work? How does approaching trauma or?
Yeah, and even if we were to place trauma with people go through hard things, right? How do people approach what they've gone through that's hard, that's shaped them into ways that feel hard or fearful or anxiety ridden?
I think there is a common misconception too with trauma that it happens more to people in certain populations. Like it doesn't discriminate, it's across the board. So whether someone's working at a gas station or working in the C-suite, whether someone grew up wealthy or grew up poor, like that doesn't necessarily, yes, there are risk factors that go with lack of access to things, but in terms of social dynamics, in terms of harm done by other people, I've worked with the whole range, and what I've learned is a gentle approach, like not avoiding and definitely not going. I mean, avoidance shows up in all kinds of ways. Avoidance shows up in overworking. Ding, 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 right? Avoidance shows up in overcaring for other people. Hello, friends and therapists, right? Avoidance shows up in binge eating, sometimes connected to eating disorders. It shows up in shopping. It shows up in substance abuse and alcohol use in so many ways, in gaming or technology addiction. Like there's so many ways we can avoid. And so rather than avoid, can we find enough support to gently approach? So wherever you are in the spectrum, wherever you put yourself socially or wherever you're working, if you're not working, if you can find a gentle way to approach yourself, your experience, and you use the word shadow, and we've talked about this, I don't always connect with that the way people describe it. I mean, I think you and I tend to think of it like a yin and a yang, a dark and a light. There's emotions that are hard in the shadow that we don't want to approach because they hurt.
But it can feel kind of witchy and weird. Like, what is this shadow? Like, am I getting a black cat and like burning incense and sage through my house? Is that shadow work? I get that.
I'm all down with all the witchy stuff too, but I think sometimes shadow work can come across like there's this dark, toxic part of you that you have to excavate. And I don't see it that way. Some people might relate to that, and they might relate to that as a result of their trauma too. Side note. But I see it as the things that we tuck away because they feel too hard, because we don't want to see it. Oh, it's too hard for me to think of myself that way, or for someone else to see, like the shame. So I don't want someone else to see me that way. Or I don't want to face that I went through that experience. Someone like me could have lost their brother at 22 and just plowed on and never talked about it and had this big lump of grief. I mean, the first time I felt grief in a relationship, my first relationship that ended, I told my friend for like a year that I felt like I had a golf ball stuck in my heart. No, I think it started like a pork bun. I told her, I feel like, Gertie, shout out for listening all those years. I feel like I have a pork bun in my chest. And she was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And then I was like, okay, now it's like a tennis ball. Now it's a golf ball. And eventually it went away, but I have no more items stuck in my chest. But some of us don't have that process where the pork bun gets smaller, right? Where we address it, where we share it, where we like take it day by day and move through the pain or the stuck energy or whatever it is in terms of our response to that loss or that trauma. So if we can just gently approach, like that would be, if there's one takeaway, if someone's listening and they're like, oh, I've been through so many traumatic things, I've never processed them. I'd be like, what's a really gentle approach that you can manage today? And that approach will probably evolve. The other question I would add to that is, what's a support that's going to help you approach that? Is it letting a friend in on it? Is it finding a good counselor or therapist? Is it going for a walk for 30 minutes, right? Whatever it is, it's going to be different for all of us, and it's probably also going to change over time. But what support will allow you to gently approach, whether we call it the shadow or we call it the trauma, that ball of emotional energy or experience that you might be carrying that doesn't have to mean anything bad or negative about you. Like that's the part of the shadow work that I feel like sometimes we can get stuck in wellness culture of like, beyond just cleansing ourselves, having to be pure or having to get everything done. And then, you get to this point and you've had so much growth, and then you're like, oh, I had a bad day. It's like, yeah, because you're human, right? Like it's not about this like ultimate end. It's more about the process.
Well, and yoga was a doorway for you. Meditation is a doorway for me. Part of what I am kind of formally announcing in this episode of Finding Treasures in the Trash is something called Inner Truth Work, which is a soft, slow way that leans into meditation, specifically highly embodied meditation, in kind of a bite-sized chunk way that people at home can, self-guide around. And for me, this idea of that, like playfully calling it finding treasures in the trash, for me, my 30 years of meditation practice and also working in the corporate world, I think, I was single until I'm almost 60 now. I was single until I was 51. I was working with mostly, a male archetype, whether it was a man or woman, but definitely male archetype environment. And it was painful for me every day. I had my own, if you listen to episode 1, you'll hear about my story in my life, but I had, multiple moments of big trauma. Drug addicted mom who was also borderline personality disorder. I had a father who was like an angeraholic, and we were always surrounded by big, scary men in the Middle Eastern community that I grew up in. And I just didn't feel safe. And I'm still unpacking, the ways in which I don't feel safe. But meditation for me, that it offered a very titrated way for me to close my eyes, go into my internal universe of me, and begin to look around and see what's here. What is there muck? Is there ick? I mean, I jokingly call it that because I do think that it can alchemize into the gold of our lives. So I just wanted to point out, that your doorway is yoga, my doorway is meditation. There's many doorways that people can do this work. My invitation here on this podcast is to try inner truth work, and we're offering a 5 days to truth free meditation course. You give me your email and you get the course on YouTube, and it's 5 days of slowly and easily just beginning to open this portal, to open this doorway into what's here for you, what's hiding out, what needs to come forward. So allowing the pain forward and listening to this story may be a portal, right? Like it can maybe even shape you. I mean, I'm hearing your story and I'm wondering if you feel like the work that you did shaped who you are.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because did it shape who I am? It depends on how you define who I am, because I largely feel like myself throughout my life, whether I'm 5 or 15 or 45. Like I have a very solid sense of myself, and it's actually challenging for me to track the ways I've changed sometimes. Like I'll have to read something I wrote a long time ago or hear something, a recording, go, oh, I can't believe I said that. I don't think that anymore, right? To just see how my mind has maybe changed. But I have a very stable sense of self. I would definitely say that experiencing that loss at 22 and diving into processing it and feeling it, which was not fun. Like, yes, I had this warm hug of the yoga community, but I felt a lot of difficult emotions and pain and so much with that, so much grief. I don't think anyone who's been through really intense grief is like, yeah, sign me up for that. That sounds fun. Like it's hard and takes a lot of energy, I would say, to metabolize. But what happened from that is that I got so curious about like, well, why was yoga the thing that helped? I've always been interested in health and psychology and how we heal and people, but it was like, well, of all the things, why didn't I dive into, I was leading outdoor trips at the time. Why didn't I dive into that community and just go all into being in the outdoors? It's something I still love to this day and get a lot of healing from. And so it took me on this path of unpacking as I continued to learn about trauma and trauma therapy, something I already had actually more knowledge than most people at that point in my life. I started going to trauma conferences when I was an early teenager with my mom because she specialized in dissociative identity disorder, which is also something that a lot of therapists never even get training in. So I understood a lot. But as I continued my professional training, it was like, oh, that's in yoga and that shows up in, that's similar to biofeedback. That's similar to neurofeedback. That's similar to EMDR. Like just noticing these bridges. And also along those same lines, like within probably about the decade after my brother passed and we met, research started coming out more about yoga and heart rate variability and how it impacts you physiologically. And I started learning more about just the biology, and we got so much more information about like functional MRIs, fMRIs. Like we just started getting all this neuroscience, and we're still getting more.
Yeah. Particularly even in the meditation space, it was the same trajectory where like the ancients have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. And now all of a sudden we're learning that like I'm doing a polyvagal course right now, and like what the vagus nerve and stimulating the vagus nerve actually does for the entire system and trauma and healing and disease, right? We're just unpacking that all now. It's such an exciting time.
And even like the different ways that different parts of our brain can activate, the different ways our nervous system might respond to stress or overwhelm. There's commonalities in that. And then there's also variations of that. But when we start to see, oh, that's why that was healing for me. Oh, so that was the way it transformed me was I got so curious and again, just dove in like, well, let me learn more. I assisted Sarah Lazar, who did so much of the early fMRI research on mindfulness, right? And it just kept coming up that yoga and mindfulness practices seem like a lower risk way to approach avoidance or hard feelings, right? There's a community there. They tend to be gentle practices. They can absolutely be triggering. I think having a trauma-informed approach, you and I agree, is definitely the way to go. And it's not going out and binge drinking all night. It's not, falling into unhealthy promiscuity or relationships that are harmful for you or
work, right? Like workaholism, like the people who are listening to this podcast, what Amy Lynn Durham has for Create Magic at Work is like a whole different way of thinking about who we bring in when we think about our work selves. And so, you're so skilled at talking about therapeutic practices or EMDR and FMDR. I'm thinking most people listening don't even know what that is. But what they will know is you said something so key, which is avoidance. And how are we just avoiding ourselves and avoiding parts of ourselves, or knowing that we feel shame, or knowing that we're feeling jealousy, or knowing that there's a part of ourselves that we're just tucking away because God forbid anybody see it in the corporate boardroom. And the invitation from this podcast and from your work is diving in. This inner work does equal outer impact.
And I think when you speak to imposter syndrome, we could do a whole other podcast on that, because like Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, she says, like, I think imposter syndrome needs a rebrand. I agree. There's a lot to unpack there, but what feels important here is that if you are truly connecting with what's true for you internally, if you're aware of shame, if you're aware of envy, if you're aware of the ways in which you avoid, if you have ways to approach yourself and to feel more whole internally and to feel real in that, to like resolve conflicts that come up quickly internally, even within a conversation, that can actually give you much more power in the workplace. So if you're someone who's sitting there going, oh, I have all this imposter syndrome, and then I have this really difficult job, and then I have all this trauma, it's like, well, actually, if you gently approach with support some of that trauma and you resolve some of those big emotions or conflicting emotions, you learn how to work with yourself and know yourself on a deep level, you're going to be so much more powerful at work because you're not distracted by all of these thoughts that take you out of what would be the more powerful thing, which is to probably make a decision about what's in front of you and also stay connected to the people around you. I'm not in corporate work in an employee sense because I see so much toxicity in many cultures. Now, there's some that are healthy for sure, and there's variability, and health is an evolution. But there's a sense of, when you're a therapist, your job is to show up as your whole self. Your job is to do what I'm talking about and to just be real. And if someone's like, oh, you looked away, what was that about? Oh, like actually what you said kind of pissed me off. Like being able to say that as a therapist makes you a better therapist, like being able to be self-aware about what's happening in your body. So if you can do that in any environment, it's better for you and it's better for everyone. So any investment you can do on your internal world to understand yourself, to connect things that feel disparate, to just evolve in a way that feels better inside, that's going to reflect outside. It might also cause some conflict. You might have to then approach some hard decisions in your life, but you're going to be able to build better relationships. You're going to be able to make decisions that are more connected to your internal reality. And those are good things.
And I'm going to go on record to say that even if we're not therapists who, like you said, as a therapist, you look away and your client's like, what just happened? Or your colleagues are like, what's happening with you? I'm going to go on record to say that, and this is a big part of the work that I facilitate at Stanford and the Graduate School of Business for the course that I facilitate for. Human beings are so much more insightful and contain multitudes. I just learned in this polyvagal class that the nerve synapses that we have that are going on inside of our body at any given time are bigger than all the stars in the sky. I mean, that is insane. So we think of ourselves as, not picking up a small cue of somebody's eyes shifting or energetic feeling in the room. We don't talk about that in the corporate world, right? But we're feeling it. We're seeing it. We're picking it up in those millions and trillions of synapses that are happening all the time. And so in my own life, I used the corporate environment as the playpen for my own self-healing. It was the place that I did that work because it was the hardest place to do it. And so there's an invitation, right? That it's happening anyway. Like if you think people aren't picking all that stuff up and watching your eye movements, you're probably kidding yourself. And so it pays off, I think, to do the work of going inside, excavating out what's there, looking at the hard stuff, falling apart.
You'll feel more connected to yourself and you'll have less to figure out later or process later. Like if you're in a conversation and there's a moment of disconnect and you can go, oh, what just happened there? Oh, sorry, I got distracted. I was looking at the time because I have an appointment. Okay, cool. We'll wrap up soon. I just want to tell you this. Like if you can clear it in the moment, you don't spend mental energy in the middle of the night. Like, what was that? And are we good? And there's so much in terms of power, I think, in corporate environments, in any workplace. There's so much in terms of relationship, of nonverbal communication, of energy in the room. And I think we do better when we, again, gently approach that. We don't want to attack it like, I saw you do this. What does that mean? Because then everyone's defenses are primed. And you and I both know what happens when we're in a protective or defensive place, less connection. And so honoring that neuroception, as Stephen Porges would call it, that nervous system ability to pick up on cues of safety or danger, and just honoring what's true for you, like really getting interested in what's happening in there, what's real, and can I connect with it rather than la, 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 just keep going. And our culture supports that and rewards like just la, 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 keep going. But I don't think we're in the best place collectively as a country or nation to like put ourselves up on a pedestal of, wow, we're doing great. So I think we could all use a lot more physiological, emotional, social sense of safety. And part of what brings that is our capacity to know ourselves, to know our responses to trauma, to know our responses to threat and fear, and to work with them rather than against them.
Wise words. Okay, Lisa, as a closing, we're going to do a little something called the dumpster dive, and we're diving for trash can cards. And each of these cards has a question. And so I'm going to go into the dumpster right now, and I'm going to pull out a question for you.
Is this rapid fire Q&A? Is that what we're doing?
I'm going to call it Trash Can Tarot.
Okay, awesome.
I'm going to call it Trash Can Tarot.
We've been friends for so long, Cari. I'm going to trust you and lean into it. Let's go.
I know, it's a surprise. They're fun. They're fun questions. Okay, you ready?
Ready.
Okay, your question is, let's pretend your inner critic just got a makeover. What's their new job title?
Inner celebrant.
Ooh. Inner celebrant.
They're just in there like, hey, girl, look at that. You look good in those jeans.
Snap, snap. Put them on.
They're just like, damn, you just took care of that. You wanted to avoid that, but you got it done. Look at you.
The inner celebrant. I love it. Lisa, it is always such a joy to be with you. For people who are looking to find you, to read your books, to learn more.
So everything's on my website at howwecanheal.com, howwecanheal.com. I also have a podcast called How We Can Heal, interviewing lots of experts in trauma and across different venues to just talk about how we can heal. I think it's an important conversation to continue. So I'm glad you're doing this, and want to just give a shout out to everyone who's doing any kind of work on themselves or any kind of work to bring healing, whether it's internal or external. I just really deeply believe that it all matters. So come find me at howwecanheal.com. Lots of fun stuff there, including all the podcasts. And yeah, love to stay connected.
Thanks, Lisa. And thanks to our listeners.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming back every week to listen to a new episode of Create Magic at Work and really helping to support and advocate for healthy leaders workplaces, and lives for all of us. If you want any information on how to connect with me, click on the link in the show notes. You'll get access to all of the social media links for Create Magic at Work. Stay following along for more amazing episodes where we help you improve productivity and profitability in the workplace and decrease stress. Sending magic to everyone, and see you next time.